Welcome to week 8 of HIT 500 Health Statistics. Let's kick this course off right, or this session off right. There are a few things that we know that we have to continue to complete, right? Our knowledge checks, our apply and reflection. This is all going to help us to prepare for that weekly feedback, right? Which is our quiz. Now, for those of you who are watching the discussion or this live archive, the discussion form question for this week is, where would you like to move when you retire? Let's share our retirement goals, dreams in the discussion forum. Now we're talking about chapter 9. We're looking at statistics computed within the Health Information Management Department. We are going to be looking at full-time equivalent employees. We have a couple of formulas we're going to go through, as well as looking at a couple of examples throughout the chapter. Then we're going to wrap it up. And then after the wrap up, for those of you who kind of really want to just hone in, I grabbed a couple of the apply and reflection questions that seemed a little bit more detail. So I broke those down and I will be covering those after we finish with our live session. Now, if you have to go, you're golden. The live session is done, but I will be time stamping the apply and reflection for those of you who kind of want to stay, but you still have a lot on your plate that you're still taking care of. I get it. I got you. So you'll be able to just go straight to that time stamp and be able to follow right along with the apply and reflection questions. Okay. Now, for our math trivia, how many colors are needed on a map to make sure that no border will share a color? 4. And honestly, guys, math is like going to the gym for your brain. It sharpens your mind. Just a little trivia for this week, week 8. Okay, now we're going to get into the highly missed questions from both the quiz as well as last week's knowledge check. The very first question I came across, there were matching terms. You had surgical site infection rate, SSI rate. You had surgical site infection, which is just SSI, and post-operative infection rate. Okay, I have seen them pull up different questions on your final, so really understanding the difference is going to be really a good step up, I guess you can say, as you start preparing for that final, because you guys, it's coming up. Now, the next couple of questions that I found were true or false. A clean wound is in which infection is encountered and the respiratory, alimentary, genital, or uninfected urinary tracts are entered. That is false. When we talk about a clean wound, it is, I want you to think more of like a surgical wound, because when we cut into a patient, the skin has been cleaned, and then we're making a incision with a sterile instrument, okay? All right. Next question. A post-operative infection isn't difficult to determine because it's always evident whether the patient entered the hospital with an infection, acquired one, because of the surgical techniques used. True or false? That is actually false. There are a lot of times when a patient may have a HAI that doesn't present itself until after they've been in the hospital and they've been able to have tests run. Okay, so that question or that answer is actually false. Okay, so it is difficult. All right, a consultant may be the same as the patient's primary care physician. Again, this question would make you think, okay, well, the primary care physician can actually consult the patient. No, because that's having a little bit of bias. They need to have a outsider or a actual consultant to come in and really look at everything that's going on with the patient. So this answer again is false. Okay. Now for our knowledge check questions. Again, true or false? An example of 2 surgical operations and 2 surgical procedures is a tonsillectomy followed by a cholecystectomy. So your surgical procedure would be your tonsillectomy, and then your surgical operation would be your cholecystectomy, where we're actually going inside of the body, like the abdominal cavity, and removing the gallbladder from the body, whether it is a open surgical case or a laparoscopic case. So yes, that is true. Those are 2 surgical. So the question's kind of weird, right? So you're asking about 2 different cases, but one is a surgical operation, and then we're looking at a surgical procedure as well. So the question's kind of weird, but yes, this is true. One is a procedure, one is an operation. Okay. Data from statistics cannot help administrators see where additional services are needed. That is false. That information definitely helps to allocate resources throughout the healthcare facility, the department, the office. And the very last question, also true or false. A clean, contaminated wound is one in which the respiratory, alimentary, genital, or urinary tract is entered. That is true. Especially when we talk about the genital area and the urinary tract area, we constantly in our mind, when we're doing these procedures, we know that at some point when instruments touch certain parts of the area, we can no longer use those instruments anymore because they are considered contaminated. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That answer is true. Now we're getting into the chapter. This is how we do it. I'm just repeating what it says right there, okay? Getting into statistics computed within the Health Information Management Department. Our learning objectives. We are going to relate terms like full-time equivalent employee. We're going to be talking about the budget. We're going to be looking at the fiscal year, variance analysis, and of course, that payback period. We have to differentiate between an operational and capital budgets. We're going to also explain the use of different types of statistics, okay? And then we're finishing up looking at the appropriate statistics to use in management of an actual HIM department. So starting right off the bat, now, health information professionals, which you will be, we can improve processes and procedures by really just keeping track of common statistics, especially if you're in management. So you're going to be looking at employee compensation. You're going to be looking at unit labor costs. You're going to be looking at staffing, productivity, and department budgets, as well as verifying statistical reports that are generated by those HIM departments and even other departments within a facility. We are at the center of all of this data, and we should use it to keep the data to help make very informed decisions, no matter where you are in the hierarchy of your career, okay? The annual compensation for an individual employee is calculated by really multiplying the number of hours worked per year, usually 2,080, for a full-time employee. That's where we kind of look at, their time period. It's just written in kind of like stone, by the hourly wage, and then multiplying that number by any benefits they receive. And then we add the amount of benefits to the base salary. So we're looking at 20 or 2,080 hours, right? For that full-time employee. They're making $15 an hour. they have 30% benefits. Okay, so we're looking at 31,200 times 0.30 for that 30%, equaling 9,360 plus the 31,200. And we would say they have a base salary of 40,560. Okay. Now we're going to break it down. Okay. So this is just a quick, like, okay, this is some of the things that you may have to encounter when you really get into like upper level in management, if you choose to go that route. Now, the unit labor cost is determined again by dividing that total annual compensation by the total annual productivity. So you look at the total or the sum of annual compensation divided by the total sum of the annual productivity, giving you that unit labor cost. Now, the very first example that I came across, you have 2 full-time coding professionals in the HIM department, each code 20 records per day. One employee earns that $15 per hour and is paid an annual salary of $31,200. The other employee, he earns 65 cents more per hour and is paid an annual salary of $32,552. What is the unit labor cost for these 2 professionals? So you see in blue, we have to do something first. The first thing we have to do is determine the annual productivity. So what we do is we multiply the number of records coded by the 2 employees, which is 20 per day. Go ahead and put that up, times the records, okay? Then we get that number, 10,400 records coded per year. Now, we have to then determine the unit cost. So now we're having to do kind of extra steps. So before we had kind of cut and dry, this is the formula, this is where we're going. But when we get to full-time employees and really computing statistics within the department, a lot of times we have to do steps before we can even get to that final answer, okay? So once we find out how many records are coded per year, we have to determine the actual unit costs. So we're talking about 2 employees. We're going to add their 2 salaries together, okay? So we will have the 31,200. We're also going to add, as you can see, I put it up here for you, 32,552, giving us 63,752. But we're not done. We then divide the total number of records coded by the 2 employees in 1 year, which was 10,400. We take the 63,732 divided by 10,400. We know that we are producing $6.13 per record. Now, as per always check my work, okay? Because to err is human. So going through, okay, I kind of broke it up so you can kind of see the very first is in blue. I should have changed the color here, but then we go to the next step and then the final step. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 steps. Determine the annual productivity, then determining the unit costs, which gives us the per record or the unit labor cost per record in this particular instance. Okay. In example 2, if an analyst is compensated at $14.50 per hour and analyzes 6 records per hour, what is the unit labor cost? Again, you see I have us starting off in blue. The very first thing we have to do is determine the employee's annual productivity by multiplying 6 records per hour by, again, that full-time employee 2,080 hours that are worked per year. So we take our 6 records divided by 2,080 hours, gives us 12,480 records per year. Again, grab your calculators just to make sure that I'm on the right path or the right answer. So that's total productivity. Okay. We then look at talking about compensation. Here we're determining the employee's annual productivity by multiplying 6 records per hour by 2,080 worked hours per year. So that gives us $14.50 times 2,080 hours, which is 30,160 per year. So we have our total productivity, we have our total compensation, but we're not done yet. Here we want the unit labor costs, okay? What we do is we take our total compensation, 30,160 per year, divided by our total productivity. Okay, so we have our total productivity, giving us 2,416 or $2.42 per record. Okay, 2.416 actually. So 2.416 or 2.42 per record is our final answer. Now, when we calculate the cost per record based on the statistics in the table, you look at what we've got going on. The very first thing you notice is that we took each item and divided that by the average request per month. So we're assuming that everything here has the exact same request per month. So that's where we come up with $1.24, $0.61, $0.30, $0.22, and $5.92. Now, this example can be found in the ebook on page 150. Okay. Now, after you've calculated each cost per request, then you add them all together. So you're adding 124, 61 cents, 30 cents, 22 cents, $5.92, which actually comes up to 8.29. And then you round to $8.30. So that's how they got the total $8.30. So still a two-parter, right? Because we took each item, divided it by 410, got the cost per each item, added the costs up, and then just rounded to get the $8.30. Again, this is on page 150 in the ebook. The chapter also talks about productivity. Now, most health information departments have, of course, productivity standards for difficult areas in the department. For example, in the coding section, a productivity standard may be that employees should code 4 inpatient records per hour, okay? So in a 7.5 work day, because keep in mind, you are allowed to eat, we look at 30 inpatient records per day, right? Because you're talking about at least per hour, they should be doing 4. Now, factors that can influence this decision, let's say your employee has other tasks that they're also responsible for, like answering the phone or getting additional information for certain items. So they take that all into account. Typical types of records coded would be like difficult clinical cases because you have a lot of looking up to do. It may not be just straightforward, or it may be a trial procedure. So then you're looking at coding different types or something that's altogether new, okay? Now, productivity is defined as a unit of performance defined by management in a quantitative standards. You have two simple formulas accurately that calculate labor productivity. This is on page 155 in the ebook. So we look at the completed work. This is going to be the total work output minus any type of defective work, okay? Your labor productivity, completed work divided by hours worked to produce total work output. Again, the chapter tells us that determining the total work outputs and the hours work is clear, okay? So getting into example 4. Your physician's clinic CFO has determined that it costs the clinic $3.50 per telephone call for the receptionist to schedule an appointment with a physician in the clinic. And compared with $1.50 per online request to schedule an appointment. So they're kind of looking at, all right, $3.50 per telephone, $1.50 if they do it online. What would be the pre-appointment cost during the day at the clinic? So you have 250 patient appointments were arranged by online request rather than by telephone. So this one is coming straight from the book, okay? You have 250 patient appointments. So we first calculate the cost of each method. Telephone, $3.50 times the 250 patients gives us $875, okay? Email, $1.50 times 250 gives us $375. We're going to calculate the total savings. So $875 minus $375 is $500. That's pretty good, okay? Keep $500 in your pocket. But then we're going to calculate the percentage of savings, how much does this actually represent? And it tells us to round by 2 decimals. Again, this attention to detail is important. So we look at the percent cost savings. So savings divided by total cost. We have our 500 savings by 875, which is our cost for those telephone appointments. That gives us 0.57142. We convert it to a percentage by multiplying by 100, giving us 57.142%. But remember, we need to round 2 decimal places. So 57.14%. Okay, that's the percentage of savings. 57.14%. Pretty good. Not to mention that's $500 in your pocket. Okay, now, healthcare organizations, again, use a variety of methods to determine appropriate staffing levels, how many staff they need, where they need to be allocated to. Many outpatient facilities use patient encounters per FTE. Remember, FTE is just full-time equivalent employee. We're still looking at that 2,080 hours per year, okay? So this may include laboratory services, x-ray services, physical therapy, and any other ancillary service. This can be found on page 157. The reason I bring that is because I have seen questions when they look talking about full-time equivalent employee, okay? So 157 in the ebook. Now, jumping right into the example that is provided for us. Community hospital. The new HIM director wants to determine the number of employees needed in a coding section. She knows that the average number of inpatient records that is coded is 6 per hour. The hospital discharges an average of 65 patients per day. How many FTEs are required for inpatient coding? Assume that the FTEs work 7.5 hours, because they get a lunch per day, and then here's that term, we're rounding to 2 decimal places. So what you notice again is that I highlighted the important information. Again, we're looking at different steps. The very first thing we have to do is calculate the number of records each FTE can code per day. That's not saying that that's how many they code, but this is the possibility of the amount that they should be able to code, okay? So we know that they should be able to code 6 records per hour. They're working 7.5 hours per day because they get to eat. That is 45 records, okay? Now, we are going to divide the number of discharges per day by the number of records coded per full-time equivalent, or FTE. Now, we look at the required number of FTEs, okay, equal discharges divided by coded records. So we have our 65 patients per day divided by our 45 records, giving us 1.444. The required number of FTEs is 1.44. Now, you can round, making sure to round to 2 decimals, okay? So a 44% part-time employee would work 40 hours a week times 0.44, equaling 17.6 hours per week, okay? Now, this is another way to determine the number of employees needed to calculate how many minutes down to hours it would take to perform all of the work that is required, okay? So that's just another way to kind of think, all right, because you're like, wait a minute, you can't have 1.44 person. No, but we still try to calculate how many hours we actually need. And once you get into management, you start getting into part-time, per diem, and they all make up those different times based on the hours, okay? And it's not that much fun, in my humble opinion, when I had to do it. But if you like that, then this would be a great thing to kind of dive into. Now, an HIM director would like to know how many FTEs are needed to analyze the weekly discharges in her facility. There are 350 discharges per week. It takes 1 employee 15 minutes to code and analyze 1 record. Using a productive week as 37.5, which is that 7.5 times 5 days, the director determines what she'll need. So you have that she needs 2.3 employees. But how did we get there? We took our 15 minutes times our 350, it says records but discharges, is 5,250 minutes. We have 5,250 minutes divided by 60 minutes in 1 hour gives you 87.5 hours, but we're not done. We look at our 87.5 hours and divide that by 37.5, which is our productive hours, equaling 2.3 FTE. So like I mentioned, it can become very tedious. And when I was doing it, there were only a few of employees, and I was like, my brain is going everywhere. But once you start doing it after a while, it does become second nature. It's just initially, it's that shock and awe, like, whoa, okay, I can figure this out. But for her, 2.3 FTEs. The other thing that you're responsible for is the budget. Now, we look at the budget, and it is a fiscal budget over a 12 consecutive months. So you look at it as a full year. So you're trying to determine everything that you may potentially need over the year, over the entire year. That includes personnel, that includes resources, that includes education. You may have travel expenses. You may have an unexpected expense that we'll talk about a few slides later. But you are looking at a 12-month period to kind of figure out what are our goals, what do we need to reach our objectives, and so on and so on. Now, your operational budget is the one that allocates and it controls resources to meet organizational goals and objectives, again, for that 12-month fiscal year. So during the year, usually each month, a department's director, they kind of get budget reports showing the amounts budgeted and then what they actually spent. Any differences between the budget amounts and the amount actually spent, that is where we get that term variance from. Now, the assessment of a department's financial transaction really identifies different differences between the budget amounts and how much they actually spent on a line item. And that's where we get that variance analysis, where we take everything and break it down. Kind of like when you're doing your own budget. Like you have, let's say, 150 for gas for a week. No, I'm joking. But sometimes it feels like that. You know, 150, you allocate it for gas, and then you go happen to find a gas station that's like 99 cents a gallon, right? And you're like, woo, woo. Okay, that's a positive variance. On the other side, you have $150 for gas, and then you get to the gas station because you're like on E, and it's like $50 a gallon, right? So the amount that you budgeted for, you're going to have a negative variance, okay? Now, we have the actual amount spent minus the amount budgeted, and that's going to give our variance. But we have some examples, of course, for that. Here, we're determining the percent budget variance for each of the departments listed in the table below, okay? And then again, we're rounding to 1 decimal place. So we are using the information to kind of figure out just for our supplies. So we're just looking at this first line for now. We take our variance amounts, okay? So negative 1,000 divided by 3,000, giving us a negative 33. But why? Well, we budgeted for 3,000. However, we spent 4,000. So we are negative $1,000. So here, once we've converted everything, multiply by 100 to get that percentage, we are at negative 33.3%. So it's negative, right? They also wanted us to look at our training. So for our training, we're still negative 1,000. However, we were budgeted for 1. We spent 2. So we're negative 0.500. Of course, we're going to turn that into a percentage by multiplying by 100, giving us negative 50%. So ideally, you want a favorable variance. You want to be where you're like, okay, I got an extra 1,000, right? But in these two cases, one was negative 33% and one was negative 50, both negative variances, okay? Now, we also talk about our capital budget. Items in a capital budget usually have a life of more than 1 year. Each item's usefulness should last longer than a year, ideally. Examples of a capital budget will be those big items, the ones that I said that we were going to get into. So you are the HIM director and you are being told that radiology needs a new CT machine. Well, I can guarantee you that is a big money purchase, okay? So we've got to get into our capital budgets. We also look at payback periods. With our payback period, we are calculating the time frame that must pass before we get kind of like a return on our investment, where we're now seeing proceeds from what we just purchased, usually a big ticket item. Now, for our payback period, we look at total cost of the project or item divided by annual incremental cash flow, okay? And then we have to figure out, are we really buying this stuff? We have to cost justify. It is a conventional task by really quantifying benefits and savings, comparing them with what we're spending, and seeing whether or not costs are actually being recovered. A project is to last a number of years. So We look at the present worth calculations, and we compare one year with another to really look at our time over time, the value of what we're purchasing. The return on investment rate at which cash is recovered, okay? You see your average annual incremental cash inflow, supposed to be cost inflow divided by total cost of the project. We have one final example, and it's a payback period example. A new copy machine costs $3,000, and the department will realize a savings of $1,000 per year. You're going to calculate the payback period for the new copy machine and round to 1 decimal place. So this one's a little bit easier, but it will kind of set the basis if you do see some in your apply and reflection, or even in your quiz this week. So we take our 3,000, which is the actual cost, divided by the 1,000 per year of realization savings. And so the payback period for this is 3 years. Okay. Like I said, this one's kind of like, okay, but you can still use this particular example and apply it to examples that you may have in the apply and reflection. All right. This brings us to the end of the live session. Again, we're in week 8, y'all. 3 weeks left. For those watching the archives, where would you like to move when you retire? Let's share some of our retirement areas in the discussion forum. Remember that you need 4 colors on a map to make sure that no border will share a color. And math is really like going to the gym, y'all. It sharpens your mind. For those of you who are comfortable with the apply and reflection, this is where I bid you adieu. And thank you for coming. For those of you who kind of want to just stick around, I have some really good examples, no pressure, because I am time stamping the apply and reflection as well. But let's get into it right now. Okay. The first example that I brought up does talk about sick leave rates, okay? And you have a couple patients that you have, or patients, a couple employees that you're gonna have to figure out their sick leave, okay? So the very first one I picked was for employee A. Now, it says a community hospital, at a community hospital, each full-time employee is required to work 2,080 hours annually. The table kind of shows the amount of 5, okay? So there's 5 total employees, and when they were absent from work over the past year. Answer the questions below, assuming that all employees work that 2,080 hours. Use leading zeros and then, of course, round to 2 decimal places. So we're looking at A, okay? They had 6 leave hours that were used. And then we divide that by the 2,080 hours annually. Gives us 0.00288. But we're not done. We're going to turn that into a percentage. 0.288. Round to 2 decimal places, the answer is 0.29. So this one's pretty cut and dry. And so for each of these, this is what you're going to do. Okay, so if they say for B, for C, for D, you're literally taking the sick leave hours used and dividing that by the 2,080 hours annually. Okay, and now if they ask for vacation, you flip it. You'd have 40 hours divided by 2080. Okay, so it just depends on what the question is asking for. Are they asking for sick leave or they're asking for vacation? Now, if they were to ask you for all of the employees, you'll add up all of these, right? And then you have your 2,080, looking at how many employees there are, and then dividing to get the total amount of sick leave hours that were used. But here we're just looking at A, okay? 6, 280, answer 0.29. Okay. This next one I really wanted to get because you have a couple of things that you have to do to get to the correct answer. Okay, so you're currently leasing scanning equipment at cost of $2,750 per quarter and 2 copy machines at $150 each month, plus 0.01 per page copied. You estimate that you will copy a total of 30,000 pages a year per copier. What will you need to budget annually for this leased equipment? And so I really wanted to go over this one. Like I mentioned, there are a couple moving parts. Okay, first thing we're doing is we're looking at the equipment cost per quarter, 2 copy machines. So you'll notice that you'll see $2,750 per quarter times 4 quarters. Okay, so 270 times 4 gives us 11,000 per year. Okay, all right, so we know, check, 11,000 per year. The next thing we're going to look at is the 150, that's the per month that we're getting charged. There's 2 copying machines, so 150 times 2 is 300 per month times 12 months, 3,600 per year. All right, check, we've got that. The next thing we look at is that we still got to do something with this 0.1 cents per page, right? We know that we estimate 30,000 pages per year per copier. So this has a lot of little details that we really have to hone into. So you have your 30,000 pages times 0.1 cent per page copy, giving us 300, times 2 copiers equals $600. Okay, but we still haven't figured out what we need to allocate in our budget for these 2 copiers. So what do? We add the 11,000 per year plus the rental fee, 3,600, plus the amount charged per page, 600. We have 15,200 is the amount that we need to budget annually for this leased equipment. All right, so I'll keep this up so you can kind of see all the small little details. The biggest key is you have 2 copiers. So you're looking at, again, 2,000 per quarter. There are 4 quarters. That lets you know how much per year. The rental fee is 150 each, right? Times 2, which is 300 per month, times 12 months, 3,600. And then, of course, the amount per page. Now, this is just estimated, and they're charged 1 cent per copy, but there's 2 copiers, all right? And that's how we get the 15,200 once you've added everything up. So I really wanted to kind of get this one in there. Okay. All right. In September, the hospital had 3 coding professionals who coded 1,500 inpatient records, and 22 of the records failed the quality screens. What is the average number of records coded by each coding professional? You have your 1,500 inpatient records divided by 3 coding professionals, equaling 500 records. So this one wasn't too bad, right? This is where you might get thrown off because you see extra information. 22 of the records failed the quality screening. Okay, that's cool. It's just extra information. What we're really looking for is the average number of records coded, just how many were coded. Not how many failed, but how many were actually coded. Got 2 more apply and reflections that I pulled for you guys. In September, the hospital had 3 coding professionals who coded, again, 1,500 inpatient records, and 22 of the records failed the quality screening. Now we're looking at what percentage of records passed the quality screens. So you see, before we weren't worried about the ones that had failed or anything, right? But this question actually wants to know how many actually passed. All right, so we take again our 1,500 inpatient patient records, and we're going to subtract the 22 failed records. In this particular instance, we're not worried about how many coding professionals there are, okay? We're specifically looking at the records themselves. So we have 1,500 inpatient records divided by 22 failed. Again, you guys make sure you're checking my work. I got 1,478. So now we know how many actually passed. Then we just simply divide the 1,500 by the amount that actually passed, giving us 0.98533. But we've got to get that to a percentage, and we also have to round to 2 decimal places. So once we multiply by 100, we know that we're over 95% that passed, 98.533. This 3 does nothing to the 3 in front of it, so 98.53%. Okay, so you notice same information, 2 different questions. So you're really trying to hone in on information that is relevant to the question and almost ignoring the additional information that is not needed, okay? And then the last question I pulled was, you have some terms that you have to kind of match. So operational budget, payback period, fiscal year, variance, electronic signature, full-time equivalent, and completed work and budgets. All right, and you're just matching the terms to the definition. And there we go. And that is all for week 8. Again, those watching the archive, where would you like to move when you retire? We covered a lot with FTEs and everything. I really hope this helps, because I do know that this chapter is a little bit more in detail, because we're not just doing one formula, right? We're breaking things down. So I really wanted you guys to have some really good examples. Again, if there's a question that you'll go across and you're like, I still need a little help on this one, send it to me so that I can go over it for the entire class. Of course, I'll give you kind of the information, but I'll still come back and try to go over it with everyone in the live session next week, because we are coming up on our final, and I really want y'all to be prepared. Okay, I know these live sessions are kind of quick, so I tried to grab questions from the apply and reflection that I'm like, oh, this could be really good if I'm able to break it down with you guys. What question do you have for me? Any questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here this evening. Please have a safe and wonderful week. And I will see everyone who can attend in week 9's live session. Have a good night.